Hey, I really appreciate y'all coming, and I know that taking 3 hours out of your day during the middle of the week is a lot of effort, and I really appreciate that you're here. I wanted to give you a little bit of a background. First of all, my name is Phil. I'm the Executive Director of the Regional Center, and I welcome you to our Regional Center. If you're not familiar with the facilities here, as Andy just said, don't get too familiar with them because we're about to move. That's the bad news, is that we have to move 400 people and all of our stuff to a new location. The good news is the parking is much better. So it's going to be a lot easier, I think, for community events, and it's also located on the 80 freeway near the Arden Way exit, so it might be more accessible to a lot of folks in terms of its location. I hope so. Anyway, we'll be moving in about a month, so this is one of the last presentations that we'll be having here at this place where we've been now for about 11 years. I've been with the Regional Center for about 5 years and very involved with the Provider Advisory Committee, what's called the PAC. Okay. And the PAC has been talking about collaborative trainings regarding the IPP, which is the Regional Center's contract with the consumers that we serve, and the ISP, which for many of you demonstrates exactly what it is that the services are going to be, which services are going to be provided to our consumers. And I think it's really important, more now than ever, with the budget issues that we face and with the likelihood of statewide service standards and all of the other things that come with that, that our IPPs and our ISPs sort of say the same thing. It's a real problem when they're at odds, and we certainly want to make sure that they mesh well together. So I think that's going to be the primary purpose of the conversation, teaching you ways to do that. Also, you're going to get a little bit of background from a very wonderful presenter here who's going to give you some, I think, insight into the Lanterman Act that very few people would be able to give you. Carol Wesley is the director of the State Council on Developmental Disabilities, which means that she oversees this federally funded agency here in California to ensure for consumer rights. She also has the responsibility to coordinate all of the activities of the 13 area boards around California. Prior to coming into that position, Carol had the position of being the Associate Director of the Department of Developmental Services, with her specialty being in the area of consumer rights. So she knows about the law. Prior to that, she actually was the director of the organization of area boards, so she knows a lot about advocacy, a lot about the law, and a whole lot about the Lanterman Act. And I think you're going to be really impressed and surprised to hear some of the background that she can give you on the Lanterman Act and how we've gotten from where we were to where we are and where we're going. So Carol Risley, would you speak to the folks, please?
Thanks, Phil. I'll try to keep you remotely entertained, and thank you, Phil, for those kind comments. All it tells you is that I've been around a really long time, and I've done everything from direct services to lobbying to state administration, and there's not a better system to work in, let me tell you, particularly if you're attached to the government. How many of you have seen this document? Do you know what it is? Besides just a big, really ugly color. The guy that picked the colors finally left. It's the Lanterman Act. How many of you have seen this document? Cliff Notes to the Lanterman Act. If you want to read about the Lanterman Act, get one of these. You can get it. Regional centers have them. The State Council has some. The Department of Developmental Services was put together years and years and years ago by people with developmental disabilities who said, what the heck does this say? And then when they sat down and studied it, they said, oh, okay. It actually says this much. The rest is just words. And it's true. And by the way, this document changes all the time. Let me commend the Regional Center for having you here and for you taking your time out. I think it's important that you get a good basis about the system. Let me also apologize. I just got out of the dentist chair about an hour ago, and I think my lip and my words are not necessarily running terribly well together right now. Hopefully that'll improve as the day goes on. And I give you guys permission to leave because you've heard this speech before. No, can't do it. Have to stay. So, with that, let's go ahead and get started into what the act is. This guy, this is Uncle Frank. Frank D. Lanterman. Frank D. Lanterman he's been described as an old curmudgeon who had no reason whatsoever to be involved in developmental disabilities. He was a conservative Republican, not typically known for their social issues, interest in their social issues. Not that they can't be, but that's just not typical. He was not married, didn't have a family, didn't have anybody in his family that had a developmental disability, but it struck a chord. And what struck a chord were the families that came to him in the very early 60s and said, our choices here are when we go to the doctor and we find out we've had a child with a disability, or someone develops a disability after birth, we're told, put them in an institution. That is the choice. You can keep them at home, but the news is it's going to be tough as it goes on. It's going to be very hard, and some of you have done it, so you know just how hard it is. So really your choices are institutional care. Some families came along and said, we don't think that's the only choice that is acceptable. We really think that we need to have some other choices besides institutional care, and some that really keep our families together. They're focused on keeping our families together. And if I tell you one thing about the Lanterman Act, it is keeping families together. And when I say families, I don't mean just children. I mean keeping connections between people and their families into adulthood, the same as you and I do every single day. Just because we grow up, as I try to tell my mother, I'm quite old now, I have lots of gray hair, I really can make decisions, but let's be clear, she still tells me how to do stuff all the time, which I'm sure yours do too. So that they said, we want to keep our families together, and we had already been doing some things as parents. They've been doing co-ops. Gee, not a new issue, we all think that now when people talk about co-op babysitting and stuff, it's like some new issue. It really isn't. People have been doing co-ops for 100 years to serve their kids. They'd start out in church basements and school backyards and any place they could, and they'd get a bunch of families would get together and say, listen, I need a break today. How about you take the kids, and I'll take them tomorrow. And they basically started forming services. Not as formal as we have today, probably not as complicated. Maybe in a way we ought to think about going back to some of those days. We may have built more bureaucracy than we ever intended to. But that's basically how it got started. They went to Frank and they said, and some of Frank's staff, Denny Onmanson, who at one time was the director of the Department of Developmental Services, Art Bolton, who was in the legislature at the time, worked in the legislature as a consultant, and a number of other people who are still around, thank God, because we need them to continue to remind us what we're here for. Because in this day and age, it's getting harder and harder to remember what we're here to do, and because we're working under such serious threats day in and day out, and we can talk a bit about that. They went to Frank and they said, something's got to change, we've got to have something different, you're putting a lot of money in institutions. At that time, there was about 13,000 people living in California's institutions. And we want something else. So he said, well, okay, what do you want? He didn't have any answers. He didn't know what to do. He just knew that people wanted something done. And so folks said, well, we want to keep our families together in the community, we need somebody to champion our cause. And he said, I'll tell you what, I will take it up. One of the first things that happened was a report in 1965. Some people think the Lanterman Act started in about 78, 79. It really didn't. It actually started way as far back as 65. And it has been amended all along the way, every single year. It's not a permanent set in concrete law, which is actually the way law should be. It should be pliable as people change. And as you know, we've gone through lots of changes in the system. We were heavily institutional focused. We went from 13,000 people in institutions to this year we'll be down to about 1,500. Over 40 years. That's actually not a bad pace. Is it fast enough for some of us? No. Would some of us like them all closed? Yes. But it's certainly better than what it was, and it certainly is reflecting upon the change in attitude. I suspect many of you, if you're case managers, service providers, you've met the new breed of parent. The new breed of parent has an entirely different vision for their child than did the breed 20 years ago and the breed 40 years ago. Life has completely changed. I met some folks, we were doing a test, an actual civil service test at the Department of Developmental Services for a classification that was written in 1972, where you could hire people with mental retardation, and let me apologize for even using that term, but that's what the specs say to this day on the piece of paper that describes the position. And so, we had to work within, the rules, because if you try to change the rules, it just takes too long. So you just work around them and you use the words some people need to hear so you can go someplace else. But we had to design a test. And so we designed a practical, hands-on test to see if people had the skills to do filing, alphabetical stuff, putting packets together, etc. And we had a lot of families bring their young adults in, 20, 22-year-olds coming in. And I was amazed to get the chance to talk to them, because what they said was, oh, we're not looking at sheltered environments at all. That's not even on our list. We're looking at jobs, real jobs, where you make money and you have lunch with other people, and they weren't putting down what was there. They were just saying that their kids have been included in school now. And why would they go from an included environment in school to a sheltered environment when they got out? Did that make any sense? So, the system, their values, and the system has changed over time, and it will continue to change as we move into more self-determination. And we will get there eventually, ladies and gentlemen. It just will take us a long time, because we all have to be willing to give up something every time we make a change. You can't just keep the old. It doesn't really work that way. But it was nice to hear these new challenges, because sometimes when you work in this field, as you know, you get thinking about these ideas, and then you wonder, is anybody there with you, or are you just off in one of your dreamlands, which I asked the dentist to put me in this morning, and it didn't work. I don't know what's wrong with her. She doesn't have gas. I've never heard of a dentist that doesn't have gas in their office. So anyway, community-based alternative to institutional care. There was a report done in 1965, the Undeveloped Resource Plan for the Mentally Retarded of California was submitted to the legislature, and it basically said the state of California needs to accept responsibility for these folks. Now, the state of California had been accepting responsibility, but only one type, institutional care. This basically said you need to accept responsibility, and it needs to be done through community-based services. Big philosophical change in a time when people still were sure that folks had to be locked away and protected. They had to be protected. And to a little bit, probably they thought society had to be protected too.